The premier event for infection prevention and control is coming to San Antonio this June. APIC's annual conference brings you the latest research, innovative products, and practical knowledge to help you prevent infection. From inspiring keynotes to thought-provoking panel discussions, APIC 24 curates an extraordinary platform for knowledge exchange. Meet IPs from around the world who face the same daily challenges as you. If you work in infection prevention and control, you don't want to miss this event. Learn more and register to join us in person or virtually at annual.apic.org.
You are listening to the 5-Second Rule podcast presented by APIC, the Association for Professionals in Infection Control and Epidemiology. This podcast is produced by the APIC Communications Committee and is intended to be a conversation between our hosts and professionals practicing in the infection prevention and control industry. You will learn and be entertained, but most of all, we hope you will be inspired by our community and the work of our peers. And now, on to the show.
Welcome to the 5-Second Rule podcast. We are your co-hosts. I'm Kelly Holmes, and my preferred pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Lerenza Howard, and my preferred pronouns are also she, her.
We are so excited to be joined today by Heather Saunders. Heather first discovered her love of infection prevention and control and chai tea during a short-term assignment in Nairobi, Kenya, where she worked to improve maternal and child health through prevention and control of infectious disease. After spending the first 6 years of her nursing career in busy emergency departments, Heather transitioned away from the bedside to join the work at the Johns Hopkins Hospital as an infection control epidemiologist. Following the completion of her master's degree in public health, Heather became the infection prevention and control nurse consultant for the state of Maryland, where she assisted hospitals in their response to healthcare-associated infections. Currently, Heather is employed with Johns Hopkins University Division of Infectious Diseases as a research nurse program manager, where she uses her expertise to guide research in the prevention and control of infections in healthcare settings. Additionally, Heather's the owner of Broad Street Prevention, where she serves as an infection prevention consultant. So Heather's here today to share her personal recipe for wellness with us and elements that she has chosen to incorporate into her journey. So remember, we're not trained as psychologists, but I have no doubt that you're going to find some really helpful strategies in Heather's practical approach. So welcome, Heather.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
Absolutely, Heather. I am so excited to have you on the show. And little does everyone know, we've actually coined Heather as an IP wellness guru. So Heather, please share with us your journey into exploring wellness and how it's applied within your personal life and your practice as an IP.
Well, I certainly didn't set out to become an IP wellness guru, nor do I necessarily consider myself to be one, but I deeply appreciate that title. And I suppose that you could say that I'm a little bit of a self-made guru. That's something I can humbly accept. But my journey to wellness really started with me being unwell. It started when I felt completely burned out in my job and in my life and being unsure of what to do next. I had completely drained myself and I had nothing left to give. I honestly wasn't sure how I was going to climb out of that. I was that girl who was putting on everybody else's oxygen mask before I was putting on my own. And I think that I've honestly lived my whole life that way, to be honest. I've been focused on taking care of everyone else before I took care of myself. And I'm here today because I really suspect that a lot of our listeners, our colleagues in infection prevention and control, might be much the same. I think we care deeply about our job, the mission of our profession, other people, and that's why we're here. We're really passionate about what we do and the populations we serve. But I think we also maybe have this personality where we have that tendency to kind of sacrifice our own well-being for the job at the benefit of others. And so when I recognized this, that I was experiencing my own burnout, I went on this mission to find my way back to the passion that I had for the job. And now I'm here. I'm being called a wellness guru. And, I'm really excited, guys, to raise some awareness around this experience of burnout and talk together about how we can, make our way through burnout and to the other side.
I think that is absolutely integral to understand and know the importance of self-care, because self-care is the best care that you can provide. Essentially, as you were noting, you're no good to anyone else if you're not taking care of yourself first. And even with that, even just with our work as IPs, we have those external factors, the things that we're going through in our personal lives that also come into play within our work as an IP. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you make a very good point there too, Lerenza. I definitely went through a period, and I still struggle with it, actually. We're thinking that, if I'm taking care of myself, I'm being selfish. Mm-hmm. And so I've really had to kind of rearrange the pathways in my brain to realize that is actually not true. And you do have to take care of yourself first before you can take care of anybody else. So Heather, you mentioned burnout and that you were feeling burnout. What if someone is sitting and listening and they're like, well, I don't know if I'm burnt out. How do I know if I'm burnt out? So tell us how you figured out that you were burnt out and what some of those, symptoms look like.
Yeah. So, it's funny. The World Health Organization officially included burnout in their 11th revision of the International Classification of Diseases in 2019. It was about 9 short months before the pandemic.
Wow. Timely.
Exactly.
very, very timely. We've been describing burnout and throwing this term around for decades, but it really was officially recognized as this occupational phenomenon about 9 months before the pandemic. So here's the official definition for us. It is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. So I think that this is an important definition because often we lump together stress and burnout. I don't know how many times I've heard somebody say, oh, I'm so burned out, I have this big project due next week. That's stress. Stress is that short-term experience where we've got something going on, whether it's personal or it's professional, and we're a little worried about that, or there's some mental tension that we're not going to get to the finish line on time. But then we kind of feel better once we get to that finish line. We return back to our normal levels of productivity, the joy we experience in the job. But with burnout, it's that chronic workplace stress that leads to this phenomenon where we no longer have burnout. We no longer have joy in our job. We've been experiencing this chronic stress over time, and we're no longer effective in our job. We're kind of cynical about our job. And that's actually the 3 symptoms that the World Health Organization now lists for burnout. So it is complete emotional exhaustion and energy depletion. And it is a persistent exhaustion and depletion of energy. It is being ineffective in our job, so reduced professional efficacy, and just being completely disconnected from the job, mentally disconnected, feeling cynical about the work and its effect, your role and its effect in the workplace. And that's kind of where I was at. I was getting to this place during the pandemic where I no longer found joy in my job. I was really cynical about my job. I had no passion in my job. I didn't want to go into work anymore. Just the thought of taking another phone call about the pandemic was emotionally exhausting. And I had, gotten to this place where I felt just completely disconnected from my job. I was just kind of going through the motions. And for me, that was a big deal. I am a very infectiously happy, bubbly, excited, passionate individual. And all of a sudden, all the joy out of my job was sucked out of me. And I said, something's going on. This isn't like me. There's something going on.
Oh my gosh, that's so powerful. And I really connected with that piece of that definition that said that if these things are not successfully managed, then burnout is the result, I guess. Mm-hmm. So you think about how to successfully manage. And I think in the workplace, we're like, well, part of the responsibility lies on the facility, like how are they managing my stress or, but I think we have to really look to see internally, how can we successfully manage, or what tools can we employ to successfully manage our stress ourselves? Because we can't really rely on anyone else to manage it for us. So yeah, that was a really powerful point. Thank you, Heather.
Absolutely. And I believe that in addition to that, even outside of, us addressing the pandemic, burnout can occur at any time, right? Many of us have various workflows and we're responsible for a plethora of tasks. And there may be an imbalance with work-life balance, right? So there comes a point in which you have to self-identify that you're burnt out and then find those applicable resources to navigate through that, even if it includes your employee assistance programs, if that's available to you.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. I think that this is dual responsibility. It's the responsibility on the part of the employee to recognize, that I may be burned out, and going to your employer and speaking with your colleagues about that. A lot of times, other colleagues are experiencing burnout as well, and there are things that your employer can do to help alleviate that. But we also have some control over our work-life balance as well. And so we have to, take a hold of the things that we are able to control.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up is the fact that you have an amazing blog, right? And I was reading your blog in preparation for this episode. So a quote from your blog really stood out to me. And it's from the blog titled, "A Perspective on the Uncontrollable." And the quote states, "There is nothing outside of you that has the power to remove the peace, joy, and love that is accessible inside of you unless you allow it to." So as IPs, we wear a multitude of hats. We're IPs, but of course we have lives, I would hope, outside of the workplace. So for you, for example, you're a mom, you're an IP consultant, and a nurse program manager, right? So it's like, how do I balance all of these? So considering all of those factors, how do you incorporate wellness within your life and establish a level of balance, both professionally and personally?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And a little bit of context about that quote. I wrote it at a time when I was feeling incredibly burned out and as though there were a lot of really uncontrollable events in my life. And so to get through burnout and really heal from burnout, I found 5 things that really helped me to move along that journey. And those are the 5 things that I really want to highlight today. So number 1 is boundaries. I went from a place where I really didn't have very much boundaries in my job. There weren't any division between work life and personal life. I was taking phone calls at all hours of the day. I was emailing at all other hours of the day. I was on a texting basis with most of the hospitals throughout the state. I had no separation of work and life. And whatever job you're in, you really have to be able to have boundaries. You have to be able to say no and have a time that is for work and a time that is for your personal life. And that was a challenge during the pandemic for many of us. And especially for me, I was very passionate about what I was doing. And I wanted to say yes to everything and everyone. And work then became my life. I had no boundaries and no separation of work and my personal life. And that just led to the state of being completely exhausted and cynical about my job.
Absolutely. And one thing that I would like to share is the fact that no is a complete sentence. I know at times, especially as it applies to work, you want to be that team player. You may want to go above and beyond, but the reality is that we can only stretch ourselves so thin, and we only have the bandwidth to complete the tasks that are under our purview and the time that we have to complete those things. So just ensuring that I think that is very important to establish boundaries within the workplace and personally.
Yes. Boundaries are kind. When I read that originally, I thought, are boundaries kind? Because I think historically I had always thought like, I'm going to come across as not easy to work with or something like that if I said no or didn't have that firm boundary. But I have found that if you say, no, but we could do this or we could try that, it is very helpful and so freeing to say, nope, not right now.
Absolutely. I love so much that you just said that, Kelly, because I say all the time that you can still be a kind person, a very helpful person, and have boundaries. Having boundaries does not mean that you are not kind. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I personally have experienced and felt that myself. And oftentimes too, when we're saying no, we're saying yes to other things, and we're able to give fully of ourselves to the things that we're saying yes to. We get stretched too thin when we say yes to too many things. So it is okay to say no, and it's healthy to say no. It's one of the ways that we can prevent burnout. It's also one of the ways that we can heal from burnout. So I want to go into talking about the second thing that I did when experiencing burnout, when I realized and recognized that I was in the middle of burnout. And that was shifting my mindset. I mentioned that when you are burned out, when you are truly burned out, you tend to be a little cynical and apathetic about your job and about life. And I recognized that in myself, and that it was very antithetical to how I normally am in my daily life. I'm a very bubbly, infectiously happy person, and I wanted to change that. And that was something that I did have some control over. There were some things that I could do inside of myself to change my experience of life. I always say that two people can go through the exact same experience and have a different experience of it. We can experience the same job, the same stressors in that job differently based on how we look at life and our experience of it. And you already mentioned the quote from my blog about how, you need to accept the things that you cannot control, and you can change and control the things that you can. And so I started to look at, okay, well, what do I have control over? I have control over my boundaries. I have control over when I work. Okay. I have control over my mindset. I have control over the way that I think about my job. So making that little shift and really controlling my mindset and how I was experiencing life really helped me to start to move back toward that infectious, bubbly personality that I was missing, and the joy that I was finding in my job. Is just changing how I was looking at things.
Oh, I love that. Thinking about what's within our sphere of control. I think that also is pretty, it's like a weight lifted off of your shoulders when you do make that connection that, you know what, I'm not responsible for that person's reaction. I'm not responsible for that person's emotions. If this person said this in a meeting and it was perhaps a little pointed, I'm really not going to take that personally, because that's really what's going on inside of that other person and not inside of me or a result of me. So really focusing in then on, well, this is it, what is in my control, but I have no control over all these other things. And then you can just let it go and shift your mindset on how you're going to approach those situations.
Yeah, those are great points. And what I would share is the fact that, of course, everyone's worldview is different. And that also comes into play with how individuals experience those differing situations. And I think that at least what is good for me, or a good strategy for me, is also finding those people that you can confide in and trust to gain those strategies, because it's definitely not something that you can do on your own. Maybe with it, as Kelly noted, maybe something was noted in a meeting that was kind of pointed. Sometimes we internalize those things, and you think that in your mind, you can overthink and think that it's something that you're doing wrong. And sometimes it's great to have someone who can definitely provide a different perspective to bring context to the situation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I 100% agree. Those are some really good points. So I'll go on to the third thing that I started to do in my experience of burnout, and that is really to look for the things that bring me joy. I realized that during the pandemic, I was making my life entirely about work, and I had stopped doing all the things that I loved, all the things that brought me joy within my job and outside of my job. I even got to the point where I think I forgot what those things were. So when I realized that life was not bringing me joy anymore, I had to sit down and say, what brings you joy? What do you love to do? And so, one of the first things that I did is I took a vacation. I took a solo vacation. I took myself away from my job and I focused on me. I focused on who am I and what are the things that bring me joy. It was kind of this time of reset where I could stop and say, all right, so you're in this place. We're going to get you out of this place. And one of the things we're going to do is start to look for the things that you used to love to do. So I remembered that I love to write, and I started to write. That's actually where the blog came from. I started to write some of my life experiences. I started to write some life lessons that I was learning through this phase of my life, and I started to write poetry for no other reason aside from the fact that I love to write poetry. I started to go hiking again because I realized I love being out in the woods. And then I started to look for ways that I could incorporate the things I loved into my job. Now, I can't really get out into the woods very much as an infection preventionist, but I realized that I could write as an infection preventionist. I started writing for some of our infection control magazines. I started writing for my job, writing newsletters, and just trying to incorporate some of those things I love into my day-to-day.
Yes,
I love that. Yes, in the hospital, we talk about, post-pandemic, like going back to the basics, right? Hand hygiene, PPE, let's focus on those core things. But I think what you just told us is that we need to go back to the basics in our personal life as well. So I really love that. And I need to know, how long was this vacation?
I wish it was longer.
How long did it take you to come up with this? Was it a weekend, a long weekend, or was it like 2 weeks?
That's a really good point. Honestly, this vacation was only a week, and it was it was the inciting event when I realized that I needed to find the things I loved again. And that was only the beginning of the journey. And I want to say at this point that the journey through burnout is long. There is no magic fix to this. It takes time. It takes time to get you back to the passion that you felt for your job, the level of productivity maybe that you had in your job. And not feeling that sense of cynicism or that weight of emotional exhaustion. That took me a period of months, if not years, to be honest with you. It was a climb, a methodical climb out of burnout. But it really started with that week vacation where I just kind of sat down and said, something's wrong and I need to fix this.
Absolutely. And it's important to know that there really is no quick fix to this, because I know I will say for myself, sometimes you place more on your shoulders, or you're more hard on yourself, I should say, than others are on you, because you expect more out of yourself. But that can be, something that is not conducive to your mental wellness. And then one of the things that you noted as far as doing something that brings you joy, one thing that I gained from that is that sometimes, especially when there's an imbalance in work-life balance, sometimes some people identify their identity, I should say, is consumed in their work. So it's like when you ask them the question, like, tell me about yourself, they have some level of difficulty describing who they are outside of that title. So I think that it's important to really have your own personal identity. So one of the things that brings me joy is definitely spending time with my daughters and going out and going on little adventures in Chicago, traveling, of course, but I have an artistic side, but due to, imbalances within my life, it's difficult for me to really tap into my artistic side, such as crocheting. So with that, I know, Heather, you noted that hiking and writing is something that brings you joy. Kelly, what brings you joy?
First of all, I'm going to need a hat for winter, please, Lerenza. Now that I know that you crochet, I'm super excited about this.
Please, no. I utilize YouTube videos. Please, no.
Okay. My birthday's in July.
Okay.
So something that brings me joy, really spending time with my kids as well. I love to bake. One of my favorite feelings is when the house smells like chocolate chip cookies, the kids are filthy and running in and getting the house all messy. And, it just, the laughter and the craziness, that really does bring me a lot of joy. I really like how you mentioned, Heather, that 1 week. And I think as infection preventionists, we are all inherently overachievers. So I can see us going on this 1 week vacation and coming up with a list of 20 things. Oh, this is what I'm going to do to get through burnout, and I'm going to follow this list. And that can be very overwhelming. And so I like how you, kind of just recognized in that week time, and then kind of came home with like, okay, here's just one thing that I'm going to do consistently, like the blog, and just see where it takes me. And then I really appreciated you saying that it is a climb out, because I truly believe that it is a climb out, and it's not something you're going to achieve in a day or a week. It could be a couple years, but to just keep going with the things that bring you joy.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, all of these really have one or a couple of themes in common. One of the things that I keep hearing us say is have grace for yourself. Have self-compassion when you're on this journey through burnout. But all of these points, and we have 2 more left, but all of these points really have one big thing in common. It is, how can I invest in myself? How can I take care of myself? And that's not something that we should ever stop doing. There is a climb out of burnout, but even once we're out of burnout, we've got to keep doing these things, or else we're going to find ourselves right back to where we were to begin with. So another way that we can take care of ourselves and invest in ourselves is just looking at our holistic health. Holistically, meaning, are we sleeping? Are we exercising? Are we eating healthy? Are we investing in our spirituality? Things like that. And for me, I realized, oh my goodness, I'm eating 1 meal a day, and I don't know if I've had a glass of water all day long. Something so simple as that is realizing that I'm not taking care of my body, my mind, my body, and my soul. And that's important. We have to make sure that we're getting enough sleep, that we're eating the right foods, that we're drinking water, not just coffee all day, multiple cups of coffee. Some of us love to drink.
No,
I know.
Coffee.
I am just as bad at all of this as everybody else. But it is important. And I do find that I feel better. Amazing, right? I feel better when I am taking care of my body and my mind in these ways. So I started to incorporate some exercise into my routine. I started to look at what and how I was eating, and started to try to eat healthier. I started to keep a water bottle next to my desk and started to try to drink water. Again, these aren't quick fixes, and these are habits that take time to build back into your routine. And I am not perfect at them by any stretch of the imagination, but it's definitely one way in which we can invest in ourselves and really take care of ourselves so we can move through burnout.
Yes, I can definitely identify with all of them, especially with holistic health, because one of the things, I will be transparent in saying that when I'm stressed, the first thing that I do is stress eat. And of course, that stress eating does not equate to eating broccoli. Right? It doesn't
it's
equate
chocolate.
It's chocolate.
I hear you.
Right. And it's like, there's such an imbalance, and it's like, I'm really not taking care of myself. I'm one of those type of people that my major ideas, they come to me late at night. Therefore, I'm researching, how can I do this? How can I do that? Opposed to ensuring that I'm getting that balance in of having a full night's sleep. So I definitely identify with this key point here.
I agree. I think, I have read that our diet doesn't just include what we eat. And probably for the first 40 years of my life, I thought it probably did. Your diet, it's what you eat and what you drink. But it's also what we read and what we watch and what we listen to. And I have found that, when you're in a stressful situation, personally or at work, like the way that you respond is going to be, dependent on your experiences. So, choosing to read, like stoic philosophy every day, or a devotion every day, starting your day with something like that to give you something positive to think about, or a way to phrase what's going on in your world. I feel like that has helped me a lot. So in those really difficult conversations, I fall back on that type of advice versus like Desperate Housewives response. Which could be appropriate, I guess, in some
guilty
times
pleasure.
But yes,
it's okay. It's okay to watch that occasionally. But I
for
absolutely agree.
sure.
Yeah, Kelly, you're absolutely right. What we take in through our eyes and our ears, it matters, and it either takes away from or adds to our holistic health. Kind of gets back to that mindset too. It's our mindset shift. When we need to shift our mindset, we don't want to take in a lot of negativity. Let's look for the positive in the day to day.
I love that.
Well, ladies, we have one final point here to add to the 5 things that I really did in recognizing that I had burnout and wanting to move through that journey to the other side. And that is to recognize that it is okay and encouraged to ask for help. I think a lot of us, and myself included, feel like I've got to do this alone. I've got to get through this by myself, and see it as a weakness almost when we're walking through this season of burnout. It is not a weakness, and it is okay to say, you know what, I think I'm experiencing burnout in my job, true burnout in my job. I'm here right now saying I experienced burnout in my job, and that I had to come to this place where I recognized that it was okay for me to ask for help with that. And by asking for help, I mean seeking out counseling. I have a great therapist. Shout out to my therapist right now. Maybe I'll give her the show notes or this podcast to listen to, and then we can both chuckle in the next session about how I'm now being called the IP guru after everything that I've been through. It is okay to ask for help, and that's one of the ways in which I was able to get through this season of burnout. Is I went and sought therapy. I went and sought counseling. I had somebody dedicated to listening to me talk about this experience that I was having in my life. It is okay to ask for help in the medical profession too, going to see your doctor to describe and talk about your symptoms. Burnout can be very easily confused with other diagnoses like depression, anxiety. There are other things that maybe you want to explore if this all resonates with you. Don't try to do this by yourself. You reach out and talk with your close friends and confidants as well to be able to support you during this time. But we just want to say that it's okay to ask for help. And we encourage people on the call today to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Normalizing, yes, asking for help. I have a therapist too. And one of the ways that I try to normalize that in conversations with my friends or even coworkers is just say, I think everybody should have a therapist. I love my therapist. I think everyone should have a therapist. And I can kind of feel people just relax like, oh, haha. But it's so true. And now I have, known so many more people that have reached out for that help. And so I agree. It's okay to ask for help. And when else do you get to go talk about yourself for an hour? Seriously, right?
For someone that hopefully you do not know, someone that can provide you with unbiased professional guidance that you can apply to your life in order for you to be at your best self. Because I too, have a therapist, and there are some things that, maybe those that are the closest to me can't assist me with navigating, right? Because they know me and they have me boxed in how they view Lerenza. But sometimes you have to seek that external help in attaining a therapist in order to really actualize upon your greatness.
In line with our 5 tips, one of the ones that you mentioned, Heather, was finding joy. And the way that you do that is through writing poetry. So you have agreed to share with us one of your poems today called The Voice of the Desert. Is that right?
I have, yeah.
I am so excited to hear it.
Please share.
Absolutely. So I wrote this actually, ladies, at a time when I was experiencing the height of my burnout and realizing that, I don't want to stay here. I really want to move through this and get back to the joy that I find in life and my job. So this is the voice in the desert. I sat alone in the desert today to listen intently to what it had to say. Instead, I heard silence, no message at all. I couldn't believe it would have such gall to lead me to believe something was here for me, deserted, forsaken, and lonely. What a waste of time. What a complete disaster. There was nothing here for which I sought after. There was only me alone in the heat, with no water to drink and no shelter for retreat. But wait, in the distance, what is that I see? It appears to be a Joshua tree. A symbol of strength, direction, and trust, it reminds us that beauty can arise from the dust. I heard him whisper, "Come sit with me." So I listened to the wisdom of that Joshua tree. I know it's been hard surviving out here, lost alone and fighting your fears, but here you still stand despite it all, an overcomer who refuses to fall. But now is your time to come alive, to exit the desert and not just survive, for you were never meant to waste away here. So rise, thrive, and live without fear.
Wow, that is so amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Heather. It's very inspirational, and I hope that listeners are inspired by the self-work that you completed in getting yourself out of burnout.
Heather, that gives me goosebumps. I have goosebumps. I think that it is so beautiful and it's so brave. And I can picture a person, going to the desert looking for answers. I'm going to do this. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to come out a better person. And then you get frustrated because here I am, but no answers. But as you slowly relax into the situation, you start to notice the positive things, the Joshua tree, the strength, and that you can carry that with you. And oh my gosh, I just love it so much. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. It was all very inspirational.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I love your interpretation. That's exactly what is meant by it. So I hope that listeners can take away from that strength in their own journey.
I know I will. You made my day, Heather. So thank you very much for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for listening to APIC's 5-Second Rule Show. We want to hear from you. Visit us at www.5secondruleshow.org. That's with the number 5, where you can contribute to the conversation. Make sure you subscribe and rate us wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're so appreciative of the hard work each of you do every day to make a safer world through infection prevention. Remember, IP stands for Important Person. You are awesome. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.